lot of time talking about sequestration. The only thing you have to know is for the last 4 years, this year is no different. We have an average budget. We're lower than last year, and we're higher than next year. We just don't know how much higher we will be. So I want to talk mainly about the Department of the Navy, the greatest department in the greatest Department of Defense in the greatest nation on earth. If Don was a private company, we'd be the second largest in the world measured by the number of employees. We'd be the third largest in the world measured by the size of our physical plant and the number of and value of our assets. We would be the fifth in terms of budgetary authority. This global enterprise has a simple mission: to organize, train, and equip a Navy Marine Corps team that is built and ready for war and operated forward to preserve the peace. And we do this mission very, very well. We produce a world-class product, the finest expeditionary fighting force in history, that is in perpetual high demand, so much so that we will never, ever be able to provide the supply to meet all of the demands on this force. So we aim to build the best balanced, ready, and superbly led and trained force that our budget can bear, and one that is able to respond agilely to the widest range of contingencies that our nation might face. And we put our money where our mouth is. On September 11th, 2001, the Navy's battle force numbered 316 ships. By September 30th of 2008, the fleet had fallen to 278 ships, a drop of about 12%. That was the low point of our Navy since the end of World War II. Today we stand at 288 ships, a modest increase, admittedly, but we are on our way to a fleet of 300 ships by FY19. Now, some of you in this audience might say, or might be thinking, hey, he's the Undersecretary of the Navy. He has to tell us that. Maybe. I don't know where budget is going to take us, but we will get to 300 ships by hook or by crook if we possibly can. I'm a student of the Navy shipbuilding program. As Kent said, I was a naval analyst at CSBA before I became the Undersecretary of the Navy, and I am here to tell you I will challenge anyone to disagree with the following comment: that our shipbuilding program is in the absolute best shape that it has been since the heyday of the 600-ship Navy. Since last year, we commissioned the VA-class, the Virginia-class, nuclear-powered attack submarine Mississippi, the San Antonio-class LPD San Diego, the Freedom-class littoral combat ship Fort Worth, the Arleigh Burke guided missile destroyer Michael Murphy. We've accepted into service the missile range instrumentation ship Howard O. Lorenzen, the Lewis and Clark class TAKEs Medgar Evers and Cesar Chavez, and our first joint high-speed vessel, the Spearhead. LPD-23, the Anchorage, and LPD-24, Arlington, are both delivered and awaiting commissioning. We've christened LHA-6, America, LCS-4, Coronado, LPD-25, Somerset, JHSV-2, Choctaw County, SSN-783, Minnesota. We've laid the keels for LCS-5, LCS-6, LPD-26, JHSV-3, MLP-2, SSN-784, and AGORs 28, 27, and 28. We've cut steel on DDG-51 restarts 113, 115, and 116, as well as the DDG-1002, the LCS-7 and 8, LPD-27, JHSV-4, MLP-2, SSN-788, and 789. The composite deck house for the DDG-1000 now sits upon the USS Zumwalt, the first of class of those tremendously capable guided missile destroyers. And we've landed the island in Newport News on CVN-78. For the first time in a long time, maybe for the first time many of us can remember, all of the ships authorized through the prior fiscal year are under contract. We have 42 ships under contract right now, virtually everyone in a fixed price contract. Most of them are in block buys or multi-years. Now, these contract and milestones represent not only a focus on stability, but a commitment by the Secretary of the Navy, Ray Mabus, the entire Department of the Navy, its acquisition professionals, and our industry partners to strive for the best shipbuilding performance possible. In this regard, the DDG 1000 program continues to perform well, with the Zumwalt more than 75% complete up at Bath Iron Works. Michael Mansour is approaching the halfway point, and the LBJ is well begun. The restart of the DDG 51 production line is proceeding smoothly, with 3 of the first 4 ships awarded under construction, and our profit related to offer competition set to continue. On the affordability front, the 2013 NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, requested a new multi-year, 9 ships. We're working with Congress to leverage the savings to get to a 10th ship, and we can see that 10th ship in FY14. We can see it. We're going to need some help to get across the finish line, but it's almost there. For these reasons, the DG-51 program was selected as the 2012 David Packard Excellence Award for Acquisition Excellence. 5 of the 20 littoral combat ships procured in a 2010 fixed-price dual block buy split between Lockheed Martin and Austal are currently under construction. A 6th is going to start soon. The first DLCSs are right here under the tender care of Tom Copeman, Commander of Surface Forces. And we are preparing LCS-1 for its first overseas deployment in Singapore. The LCS Council that was put together last year by the Chief of Naval Operations, John Greenert, is overseeing any sticking points in the transition to service. And we are overcoming many, many of the problems in a ship that is so unique and so different than any other ship the Navy has ever operated. A lot of people complain that we have 2 ships, that we decided to put 2 variants into service. Secretary Mabus made this decision primarily because it made a lot of sense. We could keep both of the lines open in case we had any problems. Both of the designs have their own unique capabilities, and both of them will serve the Navy well. Actually, not too many people thought we could do this, but Secretary Mabus saw this through, and now everyone agrees this was a good decision. We have 3 mobile landing platform ships under construction at NASSCO. I just toured MLP-1. If you haven't seen it, it's simply eye-watering. It is an enormous vessel with a lot of capability. It was floated off in November and is due to be christened in March. That program is on steady, predictable course and speed. Our 13 budget request includes a plan to modify the 3rd MLP to an afloat-forward staging base configuration. We want to start in 2014. Congress has said we can go ahead and start the design. We're in the process of doing so, and we're working with them to make a 2nd AFSB, a float-forward staging base, as soon as we possibly can. In 2011, for the first time in 22 years, we now are building 2 attack submarines per year, and we're going to sustain that rate for the future. We went in with a multi-year for 9 boats, and once again, just like the DDG-51, we think we can get a 2nd boat in 14 and make it a 10-ship multi-year. We can see the finish line. We're going to need some help, but we think we can get there. We've exercised the final fixed-price option on the 10th Joint High-Speed Vessel build at Austal, down in Mobile, Alabama, with Spearhead already delivered to Choctaw County, ready to go to builder trials. On our amphib front, the LPD-17 class is getting better every day. You talk to the Marines and sailors who operate that ship, and there isn't another ship they'd rather be on. It's tremendously capable. Ingalls is building LHA-6, preparing to start construction on LHA-7. Avondale is finishing its final ship, the Somerset, and we're about to kick off the LXR, which is the replacement for our LSD-41 and 49 class ships, with an analysis of alternatives. And we intend to open that into full and open competition, which has been a pillar of Secretary Mabus's approach and Secretary Stackley, our ASN for Research, Development, and Acquisition, to shipbuilding. Meanwhile, the U.S. Marine Corps is gradually coming home after a decade of war. Having jumped from 172,000 Devil Dogs to 202,000 to meet the crushing demand of back-to-back deployments, to meet the requirements that our combatant commanders needed in both Iraq and Afghanistan, they're headed now back down to 182,100. In the past 10 years, this doesn't get a lot of play, because the Marines, as you all know, are very humble and very well say anything. They have transformed themselves into an organization that can disaggregate itself over an enormously wide area. When I visited John Tulin in Afghanistan, I asked him, what is the record for the total number of individual combat outposts that a single battalion of about 900 to 1,000 Marines broke themselves up to spread over Helmand Province to exert control over an area the size of Mississippi? The answer was 77. How do you do that? How do you keep them logistically supplied? You do it with unmanned systems like the KMAX. You do it with responsive fire support. You do it with V-22s. You do it over an area that a small force like the Marine Corps, superbly led, superbly trained, aggressive, going to the sound of the guns, it is truly remarkable. They are increasingly focused on resetting and reconstituting their gear, which is worn out. It's one of my biggest concerns with sequestration. Will we have the money to reset that equipment? We've got to do it. We owe it to our Marines. They're getting their gear in shape, and they're getting ready to go back to sea. The F-35B is off probation. It's doing well. You probably heard about a recent grounding. It's going to be an issue with the vendor. It was a vendor issue where there's a problem. The plane is doing well. And because of it, we're going to go from 11 aircraft carriers to 22. The V-22 is operating superbly across Afghanistan and all across the world. It's in a multi-year. Our 3 MPS squadrons, Maritime Prepositioning Force squadrons, are going to 2 enhanced squadrons with a whole lot of new capabilities. The Marines are rebalancing themselves across the Pacific. They're restarting up the unit deployment program. They're going to move Marines from Okinawa to both Guam and Australia. They're reestablishing their amphibious ties with the Navy, started with Bold Alligator. And along with the Coast Guard, the Marines are working with the Navy to redo our cooperative strategy for 21st century sea power. All 3 of the sea services are dedicated to the idea of a national fleet that takes all of the maritime power of our great nation and forms it into a fist. Yes, we face sequestration, and it would be a heavy burden. And if you want to talk about it in question and answers, I'll be happy to do so. But you all know we're in a bear market. We're in a bear defense market. But I'm here to tell you the Navy Marine Corps team is a smart bet. Now, many of you are thinking, once again, hey, he's the under. He's paid to say that. Don't believe me then. Read our strategy. Read our strategic guidance. Now, far too many people, and I'm going to just, I'll poke a little bit. Far too many people have kind of summed up and dumbed down this guidance as a pivot to Asia. It's a vast oversimplification of what we are doing. This document, Maintaining U.S. Global Leadership, Priorities for 21st Century Defense, outlines a new global operating model. I won't say grand strategy because everyone tries to get a name. Oh, it's got to be containment. Oh, it's got to be engagement. It's got to be something. It's the way we operate globally as a global military force. And that guidance tells us a new operating model that is different than we've done in the past 2 decades. And it is actually balanced with expected resources. I consider it to be the most coherent strategic document since the end of the Cold War. So what does it tell us? Well, it tells us we'll have less money, and as a result, we're going to shape a joint force for the future that will be smaller and leaner. No duh. We all know this. But it will be agile. It will be flexible. It will be ready and technologically advanced, and it will remain the world's finest military. So what does this guidance tell us to do? It tells us to maintain a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent, if possible, with a smaller nuclear force. How do you do that? Well, you can do it with boomers, fleet ballistic missile submarines, with submarine-launched ballistic missiles, which are the most survivable aspect of our nuclear triad. It tells us to sustain freedom of access throughout the global commons, the wide commons of the sea and the air and cyberspace. Well, you need a strong Navy Marine Corps team to do that. Sustain U.S. global freedom of action even in the face of increasingly sophisticated anti-access and area denial threats. You need a strong Navy Marine Corps team to do that, working closely with our Air Force brothers and sisters. And that's what air-sea battle is all about. We are going to rebalance the focus of the U.S. military forces towards the Asia-Pacific region, and I'll talk about that in just a second. We are going to rely on non-military means and military cooperation to address instability to reduce the demand for significant troop commitments to nation-building or stability operations. We want to develop a long-term strategic partnership with India to support its role as a regional economic anchor and provider of security in the Indian Ocean. We want to maintain U.S. and allied presence in the Middle East and the Persian Gulf, but with less emphasis of boots on the ground. If you talk with the combatant commander, General Jim Mattis, one of the smartest general officers probably in this generation or any other, he describes CENTCOM now as a maritime theater. We're reducing our land-based posture in Europe while increasing forward-based station naval forces. We're going to have 4 DDGs in Rota. We're going to have sailors in Aegis deckhouses in Poland and Romania, defending Europe from ballistic missile attack. And we have to pursue innovative, low-cost, and small-footprint approaches to achieve security objectives in Africa and Latin America. This describes a new global operating model, something different, very different than we've done. And it is hard for me to imagine. It's hard for me to imagine a more maritime-friendly strategy or one that calls for more expeditionary excellence than this one. And that is the wheelhouse of the Navy Marine Corps team. Now, it is true that the Asia-Pacific is going to be a central focus of our new global operating model. And this shouldn't surprise anybody here. As one analyst put it, since the 19th century, the U.S. has considered the Pacific both as a conveyor belt to Asian markets and a buffer against any emerging great powers on the Eurasian continent. It hasn't changed for 150 years, and it has been an area of vital interest to the United States of America for at least that long. Now, this interest was diverted somewhat in the Cold War, when we focused a lot on the Central European front and the GEOC gap, the Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom gap. But we should never forget that the 2 hot wars in the Cold War were both fought in Asia, not in Europe. Now, with the Cold War won, we wanted to send a firm signal to our allies and partners overseas that we were not retreating back to the United States into isolationism. And for those of you who remember, we promised to have 100,000 troops in Europe and 100,000 troops in Asia. But our focus gradually just shifted to Southwest Asia. First with the first Persian Gulf War, then with a decade-long air occupation of Iraq, then the wars of Afghanistan and Iraq. From May 13th, 1989, which is the day that I say the Cold War ends, because that was the day that President Bush the Elder, said we will no longer use the Cold War as our security lens, to December 31st, 2012, a continuous period of 284 months, we have seen 145 months at war, 142 of them in Southwest and Central Asia. I want you all to think about that. For a 24-year period, we have been at war more than we have been at peace. And the war is not over yet. So yes, it is time for us to readjust our focus and our global operating model, because it is not sustainable. So as the forever war, as I like to call it, is drawing to a close, and as we focus on getting our economy in order, which is a strategic imperative, we are rebalancing our focus to include all of Asia. And this is important, because when you read the guidance, you will see we will maintain a presence in the Persian Gulf and the Middle East, but with less emphasis of troops on the ground. And we will expand our security thinking to include the entire arc from Southwest Asia all the way around to Northeast Asia. This vast arc, along which you'll find the majority of the world's established and aspiring nuclear powers, a large percentage of the world's nuclear energy reserves, a lot of it now offshore. the web of intricate undersea cables which connect the markets in Asia to Europe and America, busy thoroughfares of maritime traffic carrying goods and resources to all the world markets, two regional powers that we worry about all the time, Iran and North Korea, and two burgeoning anti-access area denial networks, one in the Pacific and one in the Southwest Asia, which seek to deny the United States an ability to project power, deter them, or to minimize our freedom of action. How many countries in Asia are saying, send me troops on the ground? Not too many. But I'll tell you, every time the Secretary of Defense goes somewhere, or the Secretary of the Navy, or the Secretary of State, they're saying we need the calming stability of U.S. naval presence. If Alfred Thayer Mahan and Julian Corbett were born today, and we gave them a month, and we said, hey, there's jets, there's satellites, there's cyber. Once they got their bearings set, they would describe this arc as a vast maritime theater, which would be most effectively and efficiently and cost-effectively patrolled by special operations, aerospace, and particularly naval forces. Why am I sure that naval forces are going to be so key in the Asia-Pacific region? Well, for the first thing, from a military perspective, the region has seen an astounding expansion of naval and maritime power. The modernization of Asian naval forces began in the 1980s, when the percentage of global defense expenditures went from about 11% in Asia in the mid-1980s to over 20% by 1995. This growth was interrupted by the Asian economic crisis of 1997, but it picked up remarkably after the year 2000. By 2011, the International Institute for Strategic Studies calculated that the Asian defense spending now surpassed Europe. Naval French Arms Firm, DCNS, projects that the defense market in Asia will surpass the U.S. by 2016. AMI, a very respected international consulting group, expects naval expenditures alone to be upwards of $170 billion between now and 2013. 4 navies in the region, the United States, China, India, and Japan, are growing. Most European navies are declining in size. In addition to those big 4, the United States, China, India, and Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Australia are all expanding their naval capabilities, as even smaller nations like Vietnam, who are buying diesel electric attack boats. Now, a lot of navalists look at China and they say, holy moly, China is really starting to build a big navy. I'd just like to tell you a quote by Lord Lounston, who was the first Lord of the British Admiralty in 1909. I quote, "It has not dawned on our countrymen yet that if the Americans choose to pay for what they can easily afford, they can gradually build up a navy fully as large and then larger than ours, and I am not sure that they will not do it." China believes it is a global power, that it is a great power, and a great power deserves a great navy. But that doesn't mean that we are on a course, or a collision course, for an extended naval competition. Admiral Gary Roughead, who was a former chief of naval operations before John Greenert, he went to China for talks in 2009 at the International Fleet Review there. And he said it best. We can all look at the types of ships and types of airplanes and numbers of airplanes. That's interesting and worthy of note. But it's how countries elect to use these capabilities and what purposes that they see and how they will use them and how they will interact with other navies that is important. Now, Jeffrey Till, one of the best naval analysts in the world, just wrote a book on Asia's naval expansion. And he asked himself, are we in the midst of a naval arms race? Which he described as an independent, self-perpetuating, and often overriding impersonal force that shapes events. It has an action-reaction dynamic, and it increases the prospects for conflict. There are 7 general characteristics of a naval arms race, driven by international rather than domestic imperatives, usually bilateral, intense in terms of effort and rapid expression, associated with high levels of political tension, operationally specific, indicative of high strategic stakes, and regarded as such. Now, certainly, there are some aspects of an arms race in broader Asia. But between who? Is it between China and the United States? What about China and India? What about China and Japan? Perhaps all 3. Building ships and subs are much more, as Admiral Roughead said, than what the state intends to do with them. And Jeffrey Till concludes that it is not clear that we're in an arms race, that it may simply be a big expansion. Now, it's clear that the Chinese are hedging against U.S. intervention in their affairs, and it's clear we're hedging against the Chinese using their capabilities to create instability in the region. But there is, without a question, regardless of that, a very, very good reason for the United States Navy to be actively engaged. And that is because with the rise of naval power in Asia, there has been a rise in gunboat diplomacy. Now, James Cable describes gunboat diplomacy as the use or threat of limited naval force, otherwise than as an act of war, in order to secure advantage or avert loss, either in the furtherance of an international dispute or else against foreign nationals in the territory or jurisdiction of their own state. Whew, that's a mouthful. It says there's 4 different types. There's definitive, when you have a very specific policy goal in mind. Purposeful, when you aim to change another's policy. Catalytic, which is designed to increase options for your decision makers. Or expressive, which is designed to convey a political message through expressions of naval force. The problem is gunboat diplomacy doesn't fit nicely within those 4 categories. It's somewhere on a spectrum between war and naval diplomacy, which includes port calls and collaborative exercises to build partnerships without threatening other states. But in 2011, in the carrot exercise that we have done with the Philippines for 17 years, the United States Navy had 3 DDGs for the first time in the South China Sea, which the Chinese felt was gunboat diplomacy. The United States position is, are you kidding me? We've been doing this for 17 years. This is simply bilateral exercises. But it is very unclear. You have to be very, very careful here. So Christian Lemieux, he defines gunboat diplomacy simply as the overt use of naval or naval paramilitary power in kinetic or non-kinetic operations designed to intimidate militarily or further a political goal unstated on an opponent. And he argues that there is a resurgence in Asian gunboat diplomacy for about 7 reasons. 1, there's various maritime disputes in East Asia which remain unresolved. The Chinese claim the Diaoyu Islands. The Japanese claim the same ones. They call them the Senkakus. The Spratly Islands are contested by Vietnam, China, Brunei, Malaysia, Taiwan, and the Philippines. Gunboat diplomacy is very important for signaling. Second, economic growth has led to a rapid increase in the demand for energy and food and imported goods, which means the importance of the sea has increased. Economic growth has allowed military modernization, much of it naval, and added to the credibility of gunboat diplomacy. Asia has seen a decline in interstate conflict. All of the states out there realize that interstate conflict is bad for business. So for the past 30 years, it's been relatively stable. But it might encourage gunboat diplomacy. Naval forces are preferable as a purposeful force than ground forces. You can do tip and run operations. You can do limited, tentative, non-committal probes. You can do all sorts of different options for your decision makers. And it's easier to manage from a media perspective. States that seem more willing to use gunboat diplomacy over time might cause us a problem. It might create crises where we do not want them. So the engagement of the United States, regardless of what one thinks of the hedging or what is going on in the broader among the big 4 navies, it is very, very vital. And as the Naval War College, Barney Rubel, I know you're out here, I'm going to give him a shout out. The cooperative strategy for 21st century sea power said, look, there are two different types of naval missions. One are the traditional, such as sea control, defense or attack of territory, gunboat diplomacy, strategic deterrence, ballistic missile defense. Those are generally state-on-state focused. But then there is a broad set of missions, non-traditional, essentially cooperative Navy missions. I want to read you a quote. This, with the vast increase in rapidity of communication, has multiplied and strengthened the bonds knitting together the interests of nations to one another, till the whole forms a new form of articulated system, not only of prodigious size and activity, but of excessive sensitiveness unequaled in former ages. Sounds like it might have come out of the Cooperative Strategy for 21st Century Sea Power. The person who wrote that was Albert Thayer Mahan. It is about the mutual defense of common interests, derived in large measure from a participation in a sea-based trading system, apolitical, sea-based trading system, regardless of what your politics are, in which globalization and economic growth, which every country wants. And what you are looking is the commercial interest of sea power. It's the preservation of the peace, because that is the condition of good order in the system. So the close association of navies with economic activity derives a set of system-based naval rules. Maritime security, stop piracy, stop human trafficking, stop the things that go over the seas that are bad, stop things that are bad for business, in the intent of developing a community of commercial interests and righteous ideals. Alfred Thayer Mahan again. The more our navies in the Pacific adapt this type of thinking, the less likely we will have conflict. And that is one of the key reasons why the Navy Marine Corps team will be centrally occupied in this vital region. Half of our deployed fleet, about 50 ships, are always deployed in the Pacific. 50% of them are actually based in either Japan or Guam. We're going to have 4 of our 10 joint high-speed vessels out there, 2 of our high-speed ferries, 8 littoral combat ships split between Singapore and Sasebo. We're going to have the Broad Area Maritime Surveillance System on Guam. We're going to have 4 DDGs in Rota. Hey, wait, I thought you were talking about the Pacific. Yeah, I am, because it took 10 ships to keep those 2 ballistic missile defense places manned with a ship. We can do it with 4 ships in Rota, which means 6 ships can deploy to the Pacific. And we are rebalancing our Marine Corps to there. It explains why RIMPAC is the world's largest international maritime exercise. 40 ships and subs, 200 aircraft, 25,000 sailors from 24 Asia-Pacific countries. Russia and India came for the first time. We've invited China to come. We shot 26 torpedoes, 50 missiles. We interoperated together. We talked a common language. It is the largest, and we see the largest maritime coalition doing cooperative security activities off the Horn of Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in a down defense market. The Navy Marine Corps team is a sure bet. It is a sure bet because it is the finest expeditionary fighting force the world has ever seen. You'd put your money into that no matter what you're doing. But our global operating model says we need to refocus our balance, and we need to go to the Asia-Pacific region, and there is no better force to execute that strategy than the Navy Marine Corps team. I want to thank AFCEA and USNI again for this wonderful event. I'd like to thank again the corporate sponsors. I'd like to thank everyone who makes this meeting so successful. I consider you all patriots. You are all serving your nation. And Secretary Mabus, I want to make sure you leave here knowing that we appreciate everything you do to make our Navy Marine Corps team the finest organization on the planet. Thank you very much. I think I have about 15 minutes to answer some questions, so I'll be happy to do so. You do not have to talk about Asia. You can talk about sequestration. You can talk about anything about the Department of the Navy that I can possibly answer, and I'll try to give you an honest one. I don't know if the people leaving are because they're upset, their stomach is upset, or if they want to ask a question. Yes?
So I'll go to a little different subject. One of the areas that I have an interest in and working in is STEM education and ways to get our young people into engineering and into colleges. And I would like for some thoughts on where the Navy is going with that and how we in industry can be of help.
It's a great question. In a down market, you know, a lot of people say, and you've heard it before, hey, we don't have a lot of money, so now we have to think. We not only have to get the people who are in active duty to think differently and to be able to think outside the box, and our industrial-based partners to think differently and outside the box, but we have to grow an entire new generation of people who are excited about coming in and working in the government and in the Navy Marine Corps team. Now, there's a lot of disincentives right now, unfortunately. The U.S. civil servants who serve our nation, who are a vital part of the total force, and who are absolutely essential to everything we do, haven't had a pay raise in 2 years. The House just recently indicated that they'd like to extend that a third year. Sequestration, unfortunately, we're planning on, if the worst comes to worst, if sequestration triggers and we're under continuing resolution, we may have to furlough our civilians for 22 days over a 6-month period, which will take 20% of their take-home pay out of their pockets. I stay awake at night wondering how many people are going to afford their mortgages, how many people are going to afford their tuition for their children. So there's a lot of disincentives. But what we are trying to do is working with ONR and Secretary Mabus. This is a big, big deal for him. He was known as an education governor. He wants to do everything we can to attract very talented young folks in the engineering and sciences that will help populate our acquisition workforce, our cyber workforce, our IT workforce, and keep us vibrant over the next 10 years, which promises to be very difficult and a challenge fiscally. I can't talk to you about specifics other than the fact that no matter how low our budget goes down, we will continue to put a focus on postgraduate education at places like the Naval Postgraduate School. We'll continue to focus on sending people to the Naval War College, and we will continue to try to attract fine young men and women to come into our service in the science and technologies. So I'm sorry I don't have any more specific for you.
Okay, well, thank you. And on your way out, if you happen to be going down the hall and to the left, there is a STEM area. I'd certainly like to invite you to take a look at what's there, including a new program called Porpoise that was seed funded by ONR that is Navy and maritime oriented. So I hope you'll come by and take a look for a moment.
Thank you for the invitation. Yes, sir.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the ally picture in Asia Pacific going forward.
Unlike the British Royal Navy, that at the height of their power, the British Royal Navy had a very simple metric. They tried to have a Navy that was as big as the next two navies, whatever they might be. And at no point in their time did they have a vibrant, a really giant maritime partnership with a lot of nations that they could count on. The United States Navy, which is the finest Navy on the planet by a large margin, is in an entirely different position. We have an enormous number of partners. The next 20 of the 20 largest navies, and the United States being the largest, of the next 19, 17 of them are either our treaty allies or our strategic partners. We have a very close relationship with our European naval partners and our Asian naval partners. And in Asia, Japan is just an unbelievably capable Navy. They are growing their submarine force. They have the Aegis combat system. We have a lot of interoperability. We would train with them all the time. The Australians have just adopted the Aegis combat system and the Mark 41 VLS system for their air warfare defense destroyer. The South Koreans have installed it in both their KDX-3 and their KDX-2. We train with them all the time. Our allies in the Pacific are allies in Europe, and we hope over time a very close strategic relationship with the Indian Navy, which will be a bulwark in the Indian Ocean, provides the United States with an enormous well of potential maritime assistance. And we value our allies, which is why the Cooperative Strategy for 21st Century Sea Power puts so much emphasis on our partnerships. Before that was written, Barney, are you here? Barney, how many chiefs of Navy came in 2007? You probably couldn't hear that, but not too long ago, we only had 45 chiefs of Navy come to our International Sea Power Symposium at the Naval War College. In our most recent one, we had 111. These type of maritime partnerships, everyone is invested in the global system of maritime commerce. It is good for business. And that is one of the things we rely upon. And gosh, I have to tell you, the quality of the ships that our allies are building are terrific. The quality of their sailors and their operational excellence is unbelievable. And the United States Navy is proud to serve alongside them whenever our common interests call upon us to do so. Yes?
Mr. Secretary, what do you see as the most significant challenges and opportunities in the areas of cybersecurity and network operations?
I believe we're kind of like in the 1950s in cyber as we were in atomic warfare in the 1950s. We were all over the place. It was a new means of strategic attack. Kind of thought we upended the entire regime, conventional. Thought we might have to go completely into the atomic realm. By 1956, the Atomic Division was designed specifically for the Army to operate on a battlefield swept by nuclear weapons. The planning factor for every division was to shoot 30 atomic shots per day for 30 days on the inter-German border. That's why the Army bought 108,000 nuclear artillery shells. I just wonder what the Germans would have thought about that. So, it took us about a decade to work that through. And we are in the midst of trying to figure out what cyber does. It is unquestionably a new means of strategic attack, which threatens the continental United States as well as tactical operations and fleet operations across the world. I admire what the Navy did, stand up the 10th Fleet, a numbered fleet that works with our fleet commanders to figure out the operational tactical aspects of this. And Marine Corps Cyber Command, the same thing on Marine Corps forces. But at the national level, we struggle. In my view, we're still struggling. And we are trying to find our way. What is our declaratory policy? When do you really know you're under concerted attack? If you know you're under concerted attack, what is your proper response? These are very weighty issues. And I think right now we're making more progress on the operational and tactical realm than we are on the strategic realm, but that is coming. There's a lot of brain power being thrown at this issue. So I think that over the course of the next, like I said, I believe this decade is kind of like the 1950s in terms of atomic warfare, and I think it will take about a decade for us to really understand what we want to accomplish in this realm.
Sir, do you see cybersecurity and network operations getting sufficient budget support?
Well, flat is the new up in this budget environment. But if there is one place that we are increasing our investment, it is in cybersecurity and cyber forces, both in terms of manpower, in terms of the way we tackle problems. So, believe me, within the realm of our budget, cybersecurity and cyber forces are going to be absolutely central to what we do, because we are now we fight as a networked force, and we simply cannot afford for an enemy to have network dominance over us. It would be catastrophic for us. So in that regard, I think it's always going to be at least flat and maybe growing even in a down market.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any others? Okay, I think this will be the last one.
Mr. Secretary, the argument that we have friends. 17 nations out of the next 19 are our friends. Has given some of our representatives in Congress an argument that says we don't need the kind of Navy that we have or want to have. What is the counter to that, sir?
I got to be real careful the way I answer this one.
I know.
Well, the fact that we have allies that we can sometimes call upon or count upon to assist us in no means, way, shape, or form should take us away from the minimum naval force that we believe that we have to have if we decide we have to act unilaterally. Since 1993, the 1993 bottom-up review, the 1997 quadrennial defense review, the 2001 quadrennial defense review, the 2006 quadrennial defense review, and the 2010 quadrennial defense review essentially said if you had no help and you had to accomplish the goals of our national strategy, which over that time frame was to win 2 major theater wars or combat operations in overlapping time frame, you would need a Navy of somewhere between 300 and 323 ships. The margin is not that wide, and it depends a lot on the assumptions that you use on which forces might be immediately available or which forces might be in theater, etc. We are building to a force of 300, the budget isn't out yet. Let me just say that we will be building towards a fleet of about 300 ships. We'll be right within that, and we now have a strategy of win, deny. And think about that. Why wouldn't you, if you go from a win-win to a win-deny, why wouldn't the number of ships you would need to execute the strategy go down? Because the Navy Marine Corps team essentially does the same thing in the second win as it would in a deny. So the size of the fleet isn't going to go down. And I would look any member of Congress in the eye and say, I cannot count. If we have support from our allies, that will be good. But you require the Navy Marine Corps team to be organized, trained, and equipped to win our nation's wars. And we will need a fleet of about 300 ships to do that. And the ships have to be of the right type. And they have to be properly manned. And they have to be properly trained, equipped. We have to have the right maintenance. And every damn dollar you keep taking out of our pocket makes it harder for us to do it. If you execute sequestration, the world as we know it will end. We will not have a ready Navy Marine Corps team by the end of this fiscal year if we have a year-long CR with no help and sequestration triggers with no ability to shift monies. We will have a hollow Navy Marine Corps team by the end of this fiscal year. So please don't tell me about our allies' problems. Talk to me about my problems. I sleep like a baby. I wake up crying every 2 hours. And that is what I need them to understand. And all of us need to understand. That's what the CNO talked about last week in Norfolk. That's why the chiefs are going to go up and talk on the Hill. If you trigger this 5 months into a fiscal year, it truly is kind of the worst thing imaginable. And we don't want that to happen. We owe it to our Navy, of our sailors and Marines, better. I'll get off my soapbox. It's 13:30. Thank you so much for. Well, I got the hook. Thanks. Thank you.
We have.
Uh-oh. The book says treason. I hope that's not a sign.
We have a book for you from U.S. Naval Institute, Circle of Treason, a CIA account of Traitor Eldridge James and the men he betrayed, and a FC, a bookmark that you can use with this and other books, we hope. And thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your insights. And thank you and the Vice Chairman for agreeing that this was a mission-critical meeting that you needed to attend, because we appreciate you being here.
And again, thank you for all you do.